Hey there, welcome into the studio. The on-air button is shining bright and we are ready to go. I am your host, Josh Carey. If you have spent any amount of time, like I surely have, thinking about the meaning of life and your purpose in this life and connecting that to how absolutely precious it all is, our guest today can fully relate. You know our time here must be valued and appreciated every moment because within a moment, it can all change. And it did change for our guest as he was a passenger on United Flight 1549 on January 15th, 2009, which came to be known as the Miracle on the Hudson. All 155 passengers miraculously survived when the plane lost power to both engines, and Captain Chesley Sullenberger and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles successfully landed that plane in the Hudson. Our guest is Dave Sanderson, who was the last person off of that plane, and I am honored he is with us here today in every regard. Help me welcome, it's Dave Sanderson. How in the world are you doing, sir?
Unbelievable, Josh. Thank you for having me today.
Absolute pleasure, to say the least. Let's get right into this because certainly you have so much to share. Let me ask you and start with this question. How have you come to make sense of life since the crash?
Well, when U.S. Airways 1549 was going down, I think that was sort of the first thought process, that last minute, because people ask me all the time, what was that last minute like? And one of the things I tell people was it was amazing because it's like the movie of my life was passing before my eyes. And it had such clarity. And I didn't know whether I'm the only person the world's ever happened to, but I contrast that with somebody who I know who survived the earthquake in Haiti, who was under rubble for a number of hours, and she had a very similar experience. So I think the way it really is transformed was, I saw with clarity why I was here. And all of a sudden things were popping in my head that I hadn't seen in years. And all of a sudden it's like, this is these moments in my life were all put in my life to get me to this moment, whether I'm going to a better place or I'm going to come back here. So I think that what really happened for me and the transformation happened for me is I often had clarity why I was here and I knew I had to do something different or do something with it now that I've been given that second chance.
And amazingly, you were not even supposed to be on that plane. Is that true?
No, I was scheduled to be on the 5 o'clock flight because I was at the end of a 3-day business trip, which ended in Brooklyn. And that day we were just visiting a distribution center, which opened up at 2 a.m. in the morning because distribution centers open up early. And we wanted to get there when all the stuff was happening because we were doing systems checks and things like we were evaluating systems. And it all kicks in about 5 a.m. So we got there at 5 a.m. So we got done about 10. And I was in a 3-day business trip. I'm like, yeah, let's get home early. So that's why I called the travel agent and worked with her. And she put me on flight 1549. So I gave up a first class seat at 5 o'clock to be on seat 15A on U.S. Airways Flight 1549.
So now let's go back towards, because I know from takeoff till the incident, how many minutes actually was that?
Was approximately 6 minutes from the moment we actually took off to the moment of impact in the water. So somewhere between that time frame, give or take a few seconds here or there.
Wow. Okay. So 6 minutes, everything changes. So when did you realize something isn't quite right?
Well, I heard the impact of the birds, but candidly, I fly so often. I still fly over 100 times a year. I thought the plane lost an engine. So, it didn't startle me at that moment because I know from flying so often the planes have multiple engines. So I thought he was just going back to the LaGuardia. But it wasn't until we crossed over the George Washington Bridge and the plane roughly cleared the bridge. So it's about 400 plus or minus feet, and the bridge is roughly 600 feet up. So we were roughly at around 1,000 feet at that moment. And as we crossed over the bridge and I looked out my window because I was in the window seat, I saw people's faces looking up, and I'm like, man, we're pretty close. And all of a sudden, all you saw is water in front of you. So at that point, you pretty much knew that probably wasn't going to end up very well.
So now at that time, again, 6 minutes from takeoff to impact, what was going through your mind quite literally 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 120 seconds prior?
So when we crossed over the bridge and I heard the words, "This is your captain, brace for impact," that's when I knew that something was happening. So that's when I started praying. And, I said, okay, I just basically had three parts of my prayer. Number one, whoever the dude is up front, man, he just get me down in one piece. Second, I hope the last person I spoke with, who was my client, who was over in Brooklyn, to call my wife and tell her that I did love her. And Thursday night, I prayed to God to forgive my sins. And then I put my wallet into my pants because, I just wanted, if something did happen, at least they could find who I was. And that's what I wanted. At least I wanted my family to know who I was on the plane and I was on the plane. So that was about, roughly about 2 minutes plus or minus out. And then as we started going over the bridge, it was roughly 60 to 70 seconds. So as I mentioned, I think last 60, 70 seconds, it was the movie of my life passing before my eyes. And the last thing that I thought about, man, right before impact, because I remember I looked up and said, I hope my wife pays off the mortgage. And because we made basically a promise to each other, one day we're going to pay this thing off. And at least I knew now she's going to be a multimillionaire and she's going to be able to hopefully pay off the mortgage. And I said, I hope she pays off the mortgage. And I put my head down and it was impact.
So you prayed, and within those final 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 60 seconds, as much as you could have been, were you, quote unquote, okay with whatever would have happened?
Yeah, I think once I had the clarity of what was going on and I saw everything, and I tell people, it was amazing because people say, were the people freaking out? I said, no, it was extremely calm on the plane because I think people were resolute that this is probably not going to turn out well. And some people were texting, their loved ones. Some people were praying. You could hear them praying out loud. I heard one person praying the Lord's Prayer out loud. So I think people were checking in. It's like, this is probably not going to turn out well. So I think everybody was sort of into themselves at that point. It's like, I better get things sort of squared away because probably in a few seconds from now, I may or may not be here. Right? So I tell people it's an amazing serenity because you have no control. And one thing you realize when you're on a plane, you have no control except your mind. That's one of the things I talk about in leadership. You got to manage your mind, right? So I think, and I think the other part of this, Josh, was from the business side of the equation. You want to look from the logistics business side, and I teach this, is that, the passenger makeup of the plane had everything to do with this outcome. I mean, the crew get the credit for getting it down, but it was the passenger makeup of the plane that helped the second part of the rescue because the majority, if not 90% were business people on this plane. And so you have roughly maybe 10 or so percent, which is maybe 8 to 10 people that were not, and they were on personal travel. So business people know how to handle themselves pretty much. And then I contrast that with something I heard from a captain who said, even if this could be done, say, in Orlando, what's the passenger makeup planes of going out of Orlando? 180 degrees different than New York because it's now pleasure people. People going to Disney and SeaWorld and travel. And so 10% of the people on the plane coming back from Orlando, and I do that quite often. That's why I usually get first class when I come back from Orlando because I'm one of the few business people on the plane. So the passenger makeup of the plane I think had a lot to do with people sort of checking with themselves, getting them things lined up, and sort of putting hopefully a plan together. And that's what happened for me.
So that's an incredible version of the way to look at it, that you're saying that because 90+% of the passengers were business professionals, they had a frame of mind going into it that allowed them to personally and collectively approach that mission successfully.
And I tell people this is a tremendous, blueprint for teamwork because you have 150 people, passengers, who didn't know each other or care about each other, all of a sudden had a common mission, and they pulled something off in a matter of moments that had never been pulled off before. It's an amazing lesson on if you just get your alignment with your mission and sort of put yourself in that state of mind, what you can accomplish very quickly. And I tell people, what if you could do that in your company? If you could get people on the same page, on the same mission, and check your egos at the door like a majority of the people did. Because there's no people stepping on people. There's no people jumping on people. There's no people yelling. It was I use the term controlled chaos, Josh, which means people were moving fast, and I mean, no one was hanging around, all right, but no one was losing it. So I mean, it was as orderly as it could be. So people were, sort of checked into the mission, and I think that's a tremendous business lesson for people.
What was your night like when you returned home to your family?
Well, I didn't get home till the next day. I stayed the night in the hospital because I had hypothermia. So there was a few of us that stayed the night in the hospital, and I was one of those because my body temperature got down to 94 because I was in the water inside the plane for roughly 7 minutes, waist deep in 36-degree water, and then I swam to the boat. In the water, it's cold water. So by the time I got to the triage center, they basically had to strip my clothes off because I was cold. By the time I got to the hospital, my temperature was still 94. My blood pressure was out of control. So that's one of the reasons that another passenger that I communicate often with, Barry, and I, we were in the hospital. He cracked his sternum based on all the things that were going on. So we were the two passengers that stayed the night on the New Jersey side of the river. So I didn't get home till the next day, but that was a wild night. Tell people, people wanted to talk to us because one of the things that doesn't get talked about a lot, but if you saw the movie Sully, you sort of saw how it played out because the crew was locked away. No one was getting to the crew, right? They were locked down at the Courtyard Marriott LaGuardia. So the people who had questions were coming to people like me and other people that, they could get to us. So they could ask us questions and what was going on. So that was all night long. I was getting questions of the governor of New Jersey and Port Authority director and state police from both New York and New Jersey, FBI, Homeland Security. I mean, people were just coming in there asking questions all night long. So that was a pretty wild night.
So that night I don't know how much you were in the clear. Certainly you're under good care. But when you were laying there, not being bombarded by people, and you were just with your own thoughts, what were those private moments like in terms of, I just went through that?
That didn't really hit me until about 1 or 2 in the morning because things were going by that night, right? I was 5 hours it took them to basically warm me up. So I was getting a lot of care and a lot of people. About midnight, 1 o'clock, U.S. Airways liaison came and she started taking care of things. So about 1 or 2 in the morning when all of a sudden I'm like checking into myself. I'm like, what the heck just happened? And all of a sudden, all night long on the TV they had running were showing, pictures of plane crashes. It was like, the one in the Indian Ocean is the one that stuck in my head because that was the one where it caught the tip and it was like flipping over out into the ocean, Indian Ocean. I'm like, wow, what happened? And all of a sudden I realized, man, this is amazing. I survived this, man. And all of a sudden that's when things started coming back to me very slowly. It's like, what really happened that day? I mean, I survived a plane crash. And I think that's when it started hitting me pretty severely about 2 or 3 o'clock that morning.
And when you did make it home to your family the next day, what was that initial meeting like? What was said?
U.S. Airways did a tremendous job. They had my family there, at the airport. And, excuse me, were able to bring them down to the gate, which was, nowadays that's pretty tough to do if you don't have a ticket. But they met me at the gate, and then they quickly took us back to the U.S. Airways Club so we could have some private time with our families and the U.S. Airways representatives and American Red Cross representatives and the chaplain at the airport. So that was a very unbelievable moment because I think my family was probably more emotional than I was until we got to the escalator. We were on our way out, and all of a sudden the media was down there. And I was taking down the escalator, and my wife's sort of like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. My kids are like, sort of, what's going on? And I think that's when I started getting like, this is bigger than I anticipated. I knew it was big in New York, but when I got back to Charlotte and my family was now involved with what was going on, I think that was probably the most emotional I got.
You talk about, I know that you are a podcast host also, and your podcast is called Moments Matter. Why? What does that mean?
Well, thank you for asking me because I just started my radio show and podcast recently, and people were asking me to do it, but Canley, as you know, I mean, there's a lot of logistics to go into it, and do I really have a message? But what really happened was, and this came from my book, Moments Matter. It started with just a random phone call from a neighbor to my wife who called me where you're sitting. Is exactly where I was sitting when I got this phone call. And it was a couple neighbors down the street that needed some help getting their TV on. And, they're older ladies and they're neighbors. So, you're going to do whatever you can for your neighbor, right? I mean, it's like, I could blow your neighbor off. So I'm not coming down to help you with your TV. So my wife called me and said, would you go down? So I went down and helped them. And they were older ladies said, well, it was very easy. And they said, you stay for milk and cookies. And of course, I'm not going to turn down milk and cookies. I mean, I love milk and cookies, number one, but number two, these are older ladies who could probably bake, right? So I'm like, these are probably good milk and cookies. So of course, I'm going to hang around. So they're getting milk and cookies, and I was sitting on their couch, and they had this table, and I started looking at the books, and there were pictures of concentration camps. And I love World War II history. I love it. I'll watch it. I'll read about it. And they came out and said, hey, where did you get these? They said, well, we were there. And all of a sudden, they turned up their sleeves and showed me the inside of their arm. I saw these numbers. And I'm like, you were there? And she goes, are they going to? Yes, we were in that. And then they showed me the picture where they were in this camp. And I said, you got to tell me the story. Tell me the story. Let me record the story for history. I said, they can't record it. We'll tell you the story. But I couldn't record it. And all of a sudden, I realized, these people survived something horrific. These people, they have a story. And my former sister said, this is why you need to tell the story. This is how my show came about. Because I realized at that moment, all these moments in our life really do add up. You never know when that one moment in your life is going to trigger something that's going to help you 30, 40, 50 years from now. They had a moment when they were just kids. They learned how to survive a concentration camp when they were young. So they gave them a frame of mind for that one moment. And the rest of their life, they could survive anything. Same thing with me. I survived a plane crash. And I had all these moments that led up. What helped me survive a plane crash? And I looked at all these moments, like when I was in Boy Scouts, I learned some skill sets. I had to swim across a river to get an award for a Boy Scout. I said, maybe that was the moment that gave me the certainty to be able to jump in the river and swim away from the plane. Maybe that was the moment. I don't know. I started looking at all these moments that added up. I was like, that's it. Everybody has a story, has moments. Let's do a story about the people who got to the best of what they're doing and find out the moments in their life that got them to that point and dissect it. And that's why I started the show. And then later on in January, I started my own Alexa Daily Flash Briefing called Dave Sanderson Declassified. So I can take this information down like a 5-minute format so people can quickly hear 2 or 3 quick nuggets on how these people got to where they're at.
You were the last passenger off the plane, not because you were in the back of the plane. It was almost your choice by design, right?
It wasn't my game plan. I mean, my game plan was get to the aisle, get up, and get out. But I looked up and I saw something that sort of caught my eye. I saw people walking on the seats to get out of the plane. And I didn't realize until later, that's a great metaphor for my life now that I remember that, because I always thought I only had one pathway out, get to the aisle. But all of a sudden, when you're resourceful, all of a sudden these other pathways start opening up in your life if you're resourceful. So I said, wow, this is a great metaphor for life, right? When you think you have one way to get something done, just be resourceful and it opens up. But I got to the aisle and I'm like, all right, I'm out of here. But all of a sudden I heard my mom in my back of my head say, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And that was something she would tell me when I was a child. If you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And after I started thinking about that later on, like my mother never told me what to do, Josh. She'd always make me make a choice. And I've realized that's one of the things that I have not done well as a parent. I'll hallucinate. There's other parents that are probably in the same place where we make our decisions for our kids, right? This is what you're going to do. We all make them give a choice and have a consequence. See, my mother always made us make choices to have consequences. So when we grew up, we could make decisions. So the decision I made was go towards the back of the plane because I knew that I was all right. Didn't know what was going on in the back of the plane, but you know what? I'll check it out and then I'll get out. And so I went to the back, climbed back the seats the other way, got behind everybody, started making my way out. So when I got to the door, I looked over to the right and I saw, 10F on the right. It was, and I didn't know it was 10F at that point. I saw the light. So I just got out. I was getting out like everybody else, but I got to the door. I looked out and there was no room on the wing for me. It was all filled up and no room on the boat. So that's why I was inside the plane for about 6-7 minutes, waist deep in 36-degree water. So it wasn't by choice, but just by happenstance that's what happened. And all of a sudden, I heard people yelling at me. And I didn't know initially why they were yelling at me, but what I found out was that, that little lifeboat that's on the side that you see the pictures of was floating out in the river because the plane was floating down the river because of the current. Hudson River's got a very fast current. I didn't know that. So they were yelling to hold on. So there's a picture that was shown of me on Good Morning America holding on. There's a little lifeboat waist deep in 36-degree water. And that's how I became either the last or one of the last passengers out of the plane at that moment, because I was holding on to this lifeboat so people could get access to the wing.
Speaking of choices and decisions, and I'm sure at this point, correct me if I'm wrong, you probably have no real time in that situation to consciously make a decision. Is that right? Things are just all of your history of life that brought you to this point kicks in. Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly. I think I tell people all the training, everything you learn kicks in at that moment. I mean, and that's what's really amazing, because I had all this training, right? I mean, I had sales training. I was 31 plus years into sales, but I was also a head of security for a guy by the name of Tony Robbins, and just being around that and understanding the mindset of him and the people that he hung with. You know, I tell people that was the education that I got that sort of kicked in. It's like, you know, because I know some of the strategies he uses, and he talks about strategies, right? And I learned these strategies just by being around him. And it's like, one of the strategies is how to manage your state, how to manage your mind. And that's one of the first things he teaches in all of his conferences and seminars he does. And so for me, managing my state was like number one thing. If I could manage my mind, at least I could get through it. Everything else can happen, but at least I can manage my own mind, because that's the only thing I could control at the moment was my mind.
So that's extraordinary. You spent 30 plus years in sales, and at the same time, you also spent a good deal of time head of security for Tony Robbins.
That's correct. And, you know, I tell people, you know, you get the college education, you get the formal education, all that is good, but practical everyday education, being around great people. And that was another lesson I tell my kids. I tell people, you got to put yourself around great people. One of the things my dad taught me when I was young, and it was a great lesson, and candidly, back in the 60s and 70s, I didn't understand what he was talking about. You know, I was a young kid, but he always said, put yourself around great people. And the first time he did that for me, and I've never talked about this, was when he took me to my first professional baseball game. And I loved Johnny Bench. I mean, Johnny Bench was the man, right? But my dad's man was Willie Mays. I mean, he grew up in a depression. Willie Mays was the man in the 50s, right? So the Giants are playing the Reds, and he got behind the plate seats at Crosley Field for the Reds versus Giants. And he told me, I've only read about this once, but he said, watch how they prepare. And I never understood that, right? I mean, 8 years old, right? What's going on? But I saw how these professionals prepared their minds to get into a game. I'm talking about two of the best that's ever played the game. Excuse me. And so that was a great lesson for me to learn how to prepare my mind, prepare to be able to go into battle or go into games, go into whatever I was going to go into by seeing these world-class people. So I always put myself around people that were leaders who were the best that they could be. And that top 1%, as Tony calls them, right? So that's one of the reasons I still do today. If I have a chance to be around someone that's world-class, I'll pay to go do that, just to have that energy, right?
So how do you prepare your mind?
Yeah. So there's three ways you can do it. It all depends on the situation, but I'll tell you how I did it on the plane that day, because, you know, the ways you do is through your physiology, right? When you get up and start moving around, you can change your state. That's why you see athletes. I talk about baseball, basically people who play the hitters. When they go up, they're pulling their gloves on, everything else. They're putting themselves in the state to hit the ball. That's what they're doing through their physiology. The second way is the way I did it on the plane that day, is through what's called your internal dialogue, or the questions you keep asking yourself. Because a lot of people ask themselves crummy questions. So they put themselves in crummy states. You know, so I learned how to ask better questions. And one of the better questions I asked myself that day was, how can I add even more value and enjoy the process? And people say, well, why'd you ask that? I'm like, well, I'm going to add value one way or another. Even I'm going up or I'm going down, and one way or another is going to happen. But the second thing that Tony taught me is you got to enjoy the process. Most people forget that, because if you can see people adding value all day long. Like they go to their jobs, right? People go to their jobs every day and they're adding value, but they hate their jobs. They're not enjoying the process. So, you know, ask yourself a better question. But the third way is what you focus on, because where energy goes, focus goes. Energy flows, focus goes. So if you put your energy towards one thing and focus in, you can change your state of mind. That's why you see geniuses. That's how you see a genius come here, because all of a sudden they can compact their focus and I'm going to solve cancer. And that's all they think about. So that's all that focus. That's how they manage your state. So that's how I talk about managing state. And you can manage your state in a business meeting. I used to do it in a business meeting, whether, through the questions or either tap my foot or move my hand some way just to get myself ready to rock and roll. And that's what happened that day on the plane getting out.
Now, so from January 15th, 2009, you've spoken certainly countless of times. Were you even remotely going in that direction prior, or was that one of the outcomes of the situation?
Josh, that was not my game plan. My game plan was just go back to work because I was making good money. 30 plus years of sales. I'm doing pretty well, right? I mean, we're okay. I mean, you can always do better, right? But we're okay. But fortunately for me, Tony took me under his wing. Tony was the only person that called me that night in the hospital, and we had a very long conversation about 11, 12 o'clock that night in the hospital. I tell people, he said, how did he know where you were at? I said, well, he's got pretty good resources. He's got enough people out there to figure out things, right? So, after what really started is this next event was going to be in Secaucus, New Jersey. And I was still head of security. And his assistant, her name was Liz at that point, called me and said, Dave, are you going to be there? Because she knew I'd been through the plane crash, right? And you going to be, it's New Jersey, 4 or 5 weeks after the plane crash. Are you going to be okay? I said, of course I'm going to be there, right? But when I got there, I told her and I told him, I said, hey, I'll probably have more media here than you. And it's like, he's looking at me like, what? She's like laughing. I said, so what happened? CBS showed up because I knew I was coming into town because I was head of security. It all came together, right? So he started coaching me on basically what to prepare for. And basically we got to about a year or so later, I was speaking randomly, at churches and things like that. And that's how I really started, was in the churches. But he said, if you don't do this now, you're never going to do it. He basically said, he cut the course. You got to burn the boats. This is your opportunity. You have a message to share. You got to figure this out and get it done right now. So what he did, he said, this is going to be your last event with me. He basically was very kind. Said, listen, I want to cut you loose so you can do what you need to do. And so after 10 plus years, we were in Chicago and we were sitting in Sweden. He said, this is their final event. I'm going to make sure that you do what you got to do, get out here and do it. So he's been a tremendous mentor to me. And that was really the impetus to do what I'm doing now. But I was speaking at churches and stuff, and that was great. But then I started taking the Zig Ziglar approaches. You do 50 or 60 events and you sort of learn your stuff, right? I mean, you don't get paid for it. You just sort of learn your craft. Because one of the things Tony taught me is you never take a note on stage. You got to know it internally. You got to be so embedded with what your knowledge, your content, that you got to speak from the heart. That's why I see him so passionate on stage. So I said, okay. So I did like 50 or 60 church events and community events and Red Cross events for free until I really sort of internalized what my message was. And of course that's grown now, the leadership and growth and other things. But it was a tremendous opportunity that Tony taught me.
What was then in 2009 when you and Tony were having that kind of conversation where he said, this is your last event with us. You have to go spread your message. What did he mean, or what was your message at that time?
I answered the first question and the second question. Well, what happened is every time I would pick him up to go to an event, he'd ask me a question. And it was the same question. When are you going to stop working for that company and do something for yourself? You can never be free until you work for yourself. And I would come up with excuses, and some of them were valid, right? I mean, but after so many times, he knows he called BS on you, right? He knows, right? You're not going to lie, right? So that was number one. But number two, well, what was my message, right? Why would I get out? How could I start something myself? I don't even know how to do it. But when I had the opportunity to speak, really the first part of the message was just about that experience. People wanted to hear about that experience. But what happened was the message started growing around these attributes like we were talking about state management and, managing your mind and how do you put yourself in that state and, leadership, teamwork, persistence, and all that started going out to a point where now I'm speaking with corporations and doing leadership, workshops about how to pull people together, when they have no common interests. What are those skill sets that they have to have? You got to be able to do. So it's really blossomed, and I've been very honored to be able to do that over the last several years.
there's just so much fascination in how your journey changed completely, certainly, obviously. Prior to this, did you fear death?
I don't know if I feared death. I didn't want to die. I know that. And I had a couple of near-death experiences caused by myself being stupid, right? I mean, you do stupid things when you're young, like, jumping off a cliff in the middle of the night into the water. I mean, or flipping your car because, you're going too fast around a curve and all of a sudden, you survive. I didn't fear death, but I think my minister at that point sort of opened my eyes to something. And he heard me speak. I had the honor and privilege of speaking at the 9/11 services here, which was, as you know, being especially where you are in New Jersey, it's a very emotional day, wherever you are in the country. And I had military and fire and police, and here they asked me to give this message, right? And I invited my minister, and he never heard me speak outside the church realm. He heard me speak from the church perspective and the spiritual perspective, which is good stuff. But I said, you need to hear me outside. You need to hear what I talk about. So as we were walking back to the car, he said, you know what? He said, and I'm a Methodist. And he said, in our faith, you're baptized once into the water, to the Spirit. He says, it was like you went in the water, and all of a sudden you came out, and it was a different person. He said, it was like, we don't believe in rebaptism, but it was like you sort of were baptized again with a whole new mission. And it sort of opened up to you, like in the clouds. And that's exactly, I think, what happened. It's like I went in, all of a sudden I opened my eyes, like, it's not all about me, right? Where you're a sales guy, I'm sure you have some people who are salespeople and managers who are listening today. And a lot of us have your own personal significance. I got to get the number. I got to get quota, right? I got to do so many phone calls. You got to do all these things, right? And it's all about you. But the true successful, the most powerful people are the ones who check their ego at the door. It makes it about other people. And that's what flipped for me. Because you know what? It's not all about me. I've got to figure out how I can add value to other people and how make them sort of give them the significance and sort of check my ego at the door. All of a sudden things start opening up, and that's how things start blossoming in my business. It's like, it's not about me, man. If I can help you be a better person, whether it's through my podcast, my Dave Sanderson, my online course, whatever it is, then I've accomplished my mission today. And all of a sudden, when I check my ego at the door, it's not about me. That's, Josh, when everything opened up for me. I checked my significance at the door.
You talk about how each of us will have or have had our own personal plane crash. What does all that mean?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up, because that's one of the things I realized is that everybody in life has something happen to them. And I started looking at, I started reading about leaders. I actually sort of blogged about this, even all the way back about these leaders, especially leaders, that they all had to face something in their life. I mean, no one just goes through life, it's all easy, and you get to that point, you're making millions of dollars, and you make millions the rest of your life. A lot of people make millions and all of a sudden go down, or they have a heart attack. Or like recently, I had a friend who I met back in 1999 when I was head of security for Tony, and we were on the big island of Hawaii, and he would take care of us. His name's Sam. But unfortunately, Sam just lost his house in a volcano. Now, who loses their house in a volcano, right? I mean, that's a 1 in a billion shot, okay? But that's his personal plane crash moment, right? He lost his house in Hawaii. So I realized everybody's got that one moment. And it's like, what do you do with that moment, right? And a lot of people go into depressed states. A lot of people do. And I mean, I've had the honor to go to places like Fort Hood in Texas and Oklahoma after tornadoes, and Eastern Shore, North Carolina after Superstorm Sandy. And just last fall, I went to Pompano Beach after Hurricane Irma. And one of the benefits I get now, Josh, is to talk to people who've gone through these experiences. That's a benefit that I get. And I find out that everybody, a lot of these people get depressed afterwards. And no wonder they lost their house. They had a heart attack. Something's happened traumatic. But some people have learned how to flip it and grow from it. And that's sort of where my mission sort of moved now from. It's not a plane crash experience. It's a traumatic life experience that everybody's got. I'm not the only guy in this world that's ever had it. And I go back to the first thing I shared about those two older ladies. They survived a concentration camp. Who on earth now, there's very few people, and there's a few, unfortunately, probably now in that situation. But no one has that experience. But they survived it. Let's get to these people and understand the strategies they used, right, to overcome that personal plane crash experience in their life called a concentration camp. And I got to talk to these people and understand that mindset. So that's one of the things, my mission now is helping people who've faced something overcome it and how to do it and the steps to do it.
And through that, you've developed something called PTGS, post-traumatic growth syndrome. Tell me, please.
I didn't come up with that term. I was actually approached by AARP magazine to do an interview. And, when they approached me, I get approached a lot to do interviews, right? And they said they want to interview me. I said, well, what can I add value? I mean, I know nothing about AARP, right? And candidly, I knew, why would you want to talk to me? And I thought I was too young anyway. Right? I mean, that's for old people, right? But they found out that I helped the American Red Cross up to that point raise over $8 billion. They want to understand, how did I grow from this thing? Why a lot of people went the other direction. And then they share with me this term that was being, I guess, studied at UNC Charlotte, I think North Dakota State University, called post-traumatic growth syndrome. And it's the strategies on how people grow that be going depressed. And so they shared this with me, and all of a sudden I was like, yeah, that's my story. So they interviewed me for this magazine, right? And they have this big article about the strategies I used to grow, and they sort of coined this phrase PTGS, and all of a sudden it's like, that's it. That's how I can add value to other people, is help people grow and share these strategies instead of talking about a plane crash. So I used a plane crash as sort of the background on my traumatic life experience. But that's the term that they coined, and I just sort of took on myself.
What do we need to do to grow from our own personal plane crash?
There's a lot of strategies that I talk about, and I did a TED Talk up at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. People say, well, why'd you do it there? I was asked to do 4 TED Talks. It's the same, but it's a 2-week period. But I selected there for 2 reasons. Number one, I want more of an international perspective. That's number one. But number two, Canada is going, and I do a lot of talks in Canada. Canada is going through a lot of challenges now with PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. And I can at least do it in Canada and get the message out, at least in Canada and North America. And so one of the strategies I talked about in my TED Talk, and I talk about a lot more in one of my general talks, is about the power of meaning. Because one of the things that Tony taught me and teaches all these audiences is that the meaning you attach to something produces the emotion of your life, and emotion really is your life. Your life's made up of emotion. So, and emotion, all these emotional connections sort of are what your body's made up of. And so, the way you do it is it's called reframing, right? You become conscious of those meanings you're attaching. Because if I can help people understand those meanings, why they're going through their head the way they are, the meanings they keep attaching, then I can help them reframe that. You know what? Because you can grow. You can change the meaning to anything. And I'll give you an example. I know there's another gentleman who was on the plane with me, and he lost his job. He went through a divorce. He was going through a very challenging time of his life. And he said, this is this is a tragedy. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to him. I'm thinking, this is a blessing. Same experience, 2 separate meanings, right? And all of a sudden I start realizing the reason why this guy's miserable is because the meaning he attached to is all negative. He's got to have something positive, like, you know what? I get to get a new job. I get to start my own business. I get to go out and talk about this, right? He attached a negative meaning instead of a positive meaning. And then people say, well, how do you do that? It's like the way you process it. And the way I process it was I get it out of my body. Because one of the things that Tony teaches, and I subscribe to and really talk about, is, the more you get this negative stuff in your body, it just gets deeper and deeper in your head, right? And so all of a sudden, you're so deep in your head, it's like, why does this always happen to me? This always happens to me. You're making generalizations, and this meaning is like, no, it doesn't always happen to you. Because if it did, you'd be dead. So it's like, if I can help people reframe the meanings, that's one strategy I use to help people grow and say, you know what? Yeah, it was a bad situation. Yes, you got something happen to you, right? There's this lady in Ontario I've been talking to for the last 2 years who survived an avalanche in Nepal, and she's locked up in this log cabin in northern Ontario. And I finally got a hold of her. I'm talking to her through this, and I'm like, so I used the older ladies down the street as an example. I said, yeah, that's a bad situation, but you survived. But so she had survivor's guilt, right? Why did it happen to them and not to me? Understand, got it. I said, well, let's look at these 2 ladies. Her parents died in a concentration camp, but they survived. They could have gone through the same thing. Why did they die and we didn't? Instead, they got out and did something with it, and all of a sudden built an amazing life out of a concentration. So I said, I'm trying to help reframe by changing the meaning by using those kind of references. So there's a lot of ways to do it.
One of the greatest things, and there's many great things I've heard Tony Robbins say is, and it's certainly applicable here, life doesn't happen to us, Life happens for us. Such a very mind-opening saying, huh?
Most definitely. And as you can see, Tony's been a great mentor to me, and I had the opportunity to be around him. I've heard him say that many times because, yes, things happen for a reason, right? One thing, and he didn't quote it. He quotes this, but he didn't come up with it. Everything happens for a reason, a purpose, and it serves us. See, he added that last portion when I first heard him say this back in 1994. Everything happens for a reason and a purpose, right? And I've heard that one before. And it serves us. All of a sudden, it presupposes, right? It's going to happen, but I can make something positive out of it if I put the right meaning to it. Those are the little distinctions I help people with, and I've learned is you got to put something. There's something positive can happen out of every situation. Yes, you've lost a parent to cancer. I lost my dad to Parkinson's disease. And I saw him wither away. But one of the last times I got a chance to talk to him, we talked about the state of affairs of the United States. And it's not, as you know, if you live in the United States as you do, I mean, there's a lot of division right now. I mean, you take a stand and pretty much you're not moving off that stand, and all of a sudden people are just fighting over stupid stuff. And we were talking about it. He goes, listen, he said, I was born and raised in the Depression. Both parents worked. We had to basically survive. We had nothing. But all of a sudden I got a college education, and all of a sudden I got a job, I have a family, and all of a sudden look what we have now. He goes, this too shall pass. He says, you got to put yourself in that disciplined mindset. It's like, this will pass. Nothing is permanent. And that was a great lesson for me. My dad's on his deathbed. He's talking about nothing's permanent. Wow, what a distinction. And somebody's probably going to die within, I think when he did die within 3 or 4 weeks after that. So all these little things, it happens for a reason, a purpose, and it serves us. It's true.
What is one thing in your daily rituals today, or a daily habit that you've since picked up since the incident in 2009 that you certainly may not have, that you do every day today?
Well, the first thing, I did it rarely, so I can't say I never did it, but every day now, when I wake up, I spend that first minute in gratitude, just thanking, give me another day. Just thanking, give me the opportunity to serve somebody else today, God. That's all I want. Just give me one more shot to serve somebody else today. And all of a sudden, it puts me in that state of gratitude. But then the second thing, the ritual that I do, and I learned this from being at an event when I heard somebody pray for somebody's health. And I'm like, I've never heard anybody pray for somebody's health. I've heard him pray that you can do this and that, but she prayed for somebody's health. I'm like, so the second thing I do is always take care of my body first, because if I don't have the energy and the ability to do it, it doesn't matter. So I've got to take care of myself first. And then I can honor other people even more, financially, emotionally, spiritually, physically. And that's the second thing that I do, 2 rituals I do every day.
Speaking of that, how does spirituality and religion play a part in your life today?
I think those are 2 different things. I mean, because I don't know if I've become more spiritual, but people have asked me all the time, was this a Saul to Paul moment for me? Was this like a conversion moment, right? That was the first interview I did, and it was Rick Warren's magazine, mission focused, focus, whatever it was, mission focused leadership or something like that. I forget what it's called, purpose. And he asked me that question. I'm like, no, it wasn't. I've always believed there's a greater being, whatever you want to call it. But I said this was a strong reference for faith. He gave me a reference for faith and said, you know what? If you have faith, you at least, because you're believing in something you can't see. So if I employ this one thing called faith on everything that I do, at least I know that it's going to work out one way or another. It may not work out to my benefit every time, but my plan is not God's plan. That's one of the things I realized, right? Everyone wants everything to work out all the time for him. Well, that's not his plan, right? Because I give the example back in 1994 is when I set my mission, right? And my mission was, Dave Sanderson, see here, feel and know the purpose of my life is to be happy, realize I accomplish anything I desire, would have faith in my Creator, inspiring others to be the same. And I wrote that on October 4th, 1994. But it didn't happen. And I'm like, I'm a loser, and I can't tell my wife. And I was like, man, this is a waste of money, right? All of a sudden, but January 15, 2009 comes. And all of a sudden that's realized that moment. I'm like, maybe God was telling me, oh, you're not ready to do this yet. So spirituality to me is like, God will give you what he wants to give you when he wants to give it to you. And maybe you want it right now, and maybe you'll get it right now. Most often it's about delayed gratification. And that's when I talk to millennials, especially, and when I do millennial talks, I'm talking, all the millennials come up, it's like, give me the fast track on how to do this. How do you do this so quickly? I said, I give you the fast track, but you probably won't get it, right? Because it's all about delayed gratification. You have to put the reps in. And you look at Tom Brady and all these guys, he's 40-some years old, and he's putting reps in, right, to be the greatest ever probably. And I'm not a big Patriots fan, right? I love football, but I admire that. You have to put the reps in to get the results. A lot of people today want immediate results. And, yeah, some people can get there. You go to YouTube, make a video right now and make $1 million. But true fulfillment takes delayed gratification. And that's something I learned from Dennis Waitley back in the 80s when I first started doing all this stuff.
What do you believe happens when it's all over, our time here?
I think I am going to a greater place. And I believe that I will be held to judgment, just like we all will. We'll get to that point, and I've done, there's a lot of things in my life that I have to answer for. We all have to answer for. I'm not the only guy. But I believe that, hopefully I've done enough good on the scale to at least get me into a better place. I believe that I am going to a better place. I believe that, and I think I'll have more serenity for that when that happens. I think, you know what, I've lived a life that I was meant to live. And, one of the people say, one of the things that I was having to deal with is, and I'm going to go back to sort of answer this question a different way. I don't remember that plane crash in Buffalo. It was like 4 or 5, 6 weeks after, right, where everybody died, right? And I had a client on that plane. She's from Charlotte, and she passed away. And I had to go visit this client. It was a very difficult time, because I survived. So I did this interview I did a Skype interview in Montreal for this TV station. And the guy asked me, he said, "Why do you think they all died, but you lived?" I said, I was blown away. I was like, man, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I just wasn't my time. I think that was what happened. God gives us, this is your time, right? You don't know how long it is. So all these moments in our lives, you better make it matter, because you never know what that one moment, like you said, to open up the show, that one moment's going to trigger something. Because it all comes down to one moment. So everybody dies at that one last moment, right? And you never know what's going to come. So you better live it to your fullest. And that's what I intend to do.
What is next for you? Where do you go from here?
Well, my next phase is I'm definitely going to write my next book. It's going to be around how to bounce back, how to come back. Because I think, there's a lot of people who've written about this, but I'm going to give a firsthand experience of some of these lessons and strategies that I learned to hopefully at least leave a manual or transcript behind to say, you know what, Dave's no longer here. Dave's been passed away for 20 years, but at least here's his manuscript on how he got through what's called a plane crash and how other people got through it. So that's my next really a big thing on the horizon is that. And then, so we're branching out. Like I said, the 10th anniversary of the plane crash is coming up in January. I'm doing a big event up in New Jersey. I'm really excited to do that. But, that's sort of going to be, I think, the culmination of the last time I really talked about the plane crash. It's all about how to talk about growth and leadership and focusing on cultivating your own personal leadership skills. That's one of the things I just released in my new course, because people keep coming to me. It's like, they want to talk about leadership. But what I learned long ago, it's all about you got to have your own personal leadership skills first before you can lead somebody else. So I put together a course because I want to leave a legacy behind. It's like, these are my 12 thoughts on how to build your own personal leadership skills. So hopefully you will look at it when you face that moment in life. Let's call it a personal plane crash moment. And you're going to face it. I mean, it may not happen to you directly, but what happens if your wife or husband gets cancer? You're in the middle of the plane crash, right? You're going down. How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to manage your mind? What kind of faith are you going to have? What kind of awareness do you need to have? These are the kind of subjects I talk about, right? It's about all these little skill sets that come together, because you all of a sudden have to step up and lead, and somebody else is all of a sudden you're going down, but you have an emotional attachment. How do you do that? So that's hopefully that's part of my legacy that I'll leave behind when that moment comes.
Absolutely spectacular. I will leave you with this final question, Dave Sanderson. Sir, how would you like to be remembered?
I just want to be remembered as somebody who, and go back to the question, I added value to everybody I came into contact with, and I enjoyed the process. I mean, people ask you about success. It's like, if I can just do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, where I want, that's immediate success. But the longer term success is, have I added value to you today? And by the same way, if I enjoyed that process, I'm doing it. And if I've done those two things every day of my life, my life, added value to somebody, I've done what I'm supposed to do on this earth. So, that's why I get up in the first day. How can I add even more value and enjoy the process? That's the question I'm repeating to myself, ingrained in my body. So every day, like today, hopefully, Josh, someone's listening to, I've added somebody value today. I've accomplished my mission for the day.
Wow. Well, I could speak up and say personally, you have added an extraordinary amount of value. How can somebody reach out and get in touch should they want to say hi and learn more?
Well, I would love, they want to check out my website at DaveSandersonSpeaks.com. That's pretty much where everything resides. But like you said, I have my own radio show and podcast. It's on Contact Talk Radio, 11 o'clock on Mondays. It's called Moments Matter, and very excited about that. And or if you have an Echo device or an Amazon device, I'm really excited about what I'm doing with the Alexa Daily Flash Briefing, because every day I bring new content and people's content. For 5 minutes, you can get some of this wisdom out there, and this comes up on your phone or your Echo device. So it's Dave Sanderson Declassified, and and when we're starting, in fact, we're starting kicking it off tomorrow, Josh, is people have been coming to me so much, Josh, is like, how can we sort of get around this energy and get access? Because like I talked about, my dad told about access. How can I get access to the people that you've got access to? So starting tomorrow, we're kicking this off. I have a group called Impact. It's by invitation only, but if you apply on my website, I'll give you access to people like I've been around. We've talked about today, right? And other people that all of a sudden you have access to these people and their strategies, or maybe one-on-one or in a group. So it's going to be fascinating. I have people who some of these leaders said, I would love to help you with this. So that's called Impact. And if you go on my website tomorrow, August 1st, I'd love to have you apply and see if that's something of interest to you.
Well, it interests to me. I want in. So if I understand you correctly, we go to your website, we'll see something where we click on that talks about joining Impact.
Right. Most definitely.
Wow.
And, yeah.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Before we part, if you have a minute, please expand on that. What is Impact? How do we impact?
Well, where this sort of emanated from is one of the most powerful things that I've done since the plane crash is, I've been a part of a mastermind group. And, being around 11 other individuals who have totally different mindsets have basically opened up my creativity side of my life, right? I wasn't thinking of things. And all of a sudden I realized people were coming to me, and I didn't pick up on it, Josh, for many years. People come to me all the time like, listen, you talked about, you were around Tony, you're around some of these other leaders, right, that you've been around, Tom Hopkins and some of these other people in business. How can I get access to that? They wanted my strategies, right? I'm like, well, one way is that you can just call them directly now. That you can do that, or you can come into a group and I can give you access to that, right? So if you want to get in front of somebody like Aaron Walker, who's a self-made billionaire, right? Multi-millionaire, I should say multi-millionaire, and have access to that mindset, or a Don Barden, or a Dominique Wilkins, or the guy who's a chief innovation officer at Chick-fil-A, who's in charge of the strategy, how to be innovative, because one thing we realized, Josh, right, I learned in business, whether it's true or not these days, it's the two ways to grow a business, through marketing and innovation. If I can bring you one of the top innovators in this country and you have access to talk to this guy about how to get your innovative self on and innovate for your business, that's an amazing, amazing opportunity to be in front of somebody to talk one-on-one with them. So that's how this came about. We call it impact, because it's going to impact somewhere in your life. Well, I bring the top marketing person to the top innovative person, or the top leader person, or one of the top speakers in the world who may have not been talking about today, right? So that's how it came about, and I'm really excited about it because we're going to try to limit it to amount of people, because I don't want my guests to be overwhelmed. I want them to be able to talk one-on-one or within 5 or 6 people to get those questions answered. Like, how did you come up with this Chick-fil-A, this cow concept? You're doing a cow and a chicken commercial. How did someone come up with that mindset? And so someone can tell you, this is how you have to be innovative in business, right? You have to think outside the box. This is how you think outside the box, become one of the premier fast food companies in the country, right? Having access to these people, because it's all about having the access. And what you talked about earlier, Josh, is the network. If I can expand your network through my network, I just added significant value. You don't know where it's going to take you.
like you said, expand your net worth through your network. And also another way of saying that is you are, what do they say about you're the sum of the five closest people you spend time with. And you mentioned you're part of a mastermind and all of those things. I know that is the game changer. You need to. I mean, just by logic and definition, who you spend time with is going to affect everything about. What's that other phrase that a high tide rises everybody? Something like that. Yeah. So, wow, I'm going to visit that link first thing tomorrow, but by the time everybody's listening, it's there now on DaveSandersonSpeaks.com. Yes?
Most definitely.
Well, this has been truly a pleasure, truly enlightening, fascinating, more than I could have ever hoped. When I saw your email come through to book this session, I was giddy, to tell you the truth. It's such a pleasure and an honor to learn from you, to be with you. Thank you for spending your time with us.
Thank you very much, Josh. I'm honored to be with you today.
Absolute pleasure. Everybody tuning in, thank you as well for spending your time. Like the theme was, I hope you got some value out of it. Love to have your input. If you enjoyed it, send us a little note. Let me know what you thought. Feel free to rate and review the podcast on iTunes, wherever you consume your daily podcast episodes. Until next time, everybody, thank you for joining us. Go get 'em.